Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. First time he appears on the program. We're very pleased that Councilman Brannan joins us as finance chair of the New York City Council. He's also a candidate for New York City Comptroller. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Zev, thank you so much for having me. I've, followed you. I know very much about you, and it's an honor to be on your show.
I thank you, David Schwartz, for arranging for that. So first time, but not the last time you're joining us. So
right
maybe a good idea. People know what the mayor does. Just give people an overview what the New York City Comptroller does.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people don't know. Basically, I like to say if the mayor is the CEO of the city of New York, then the controller is the CFO. You're basically the chief fiscal officer of the city. You have a staff of about 700 economists and lawyers and financial analysts and fund managers who number one priority is managing the city's almost $300 billion pension system. And you also have the power of the audit to audit the city agencies and departments to make sure that taxpayers are getting a good return on their investment. That's I'm so interested in the job because I currently serve as chair of the finance committee of the city council. Over the past 3 years, I've been negotiating and overseeing the largest municipal budget in the country. The city budget right now, the city of New York budget is $115 billion. It's a lot of work. I work with a lot of talented people and I love my job. I wish I could keep this job forever, but term limits calls. So I'm running for controller, but I wouldn't be running for controller if I wasn't already the finance chair and if I didn't have the experience of my current job.
But you're also term limited.
Yes, I am. This is my last year. Yes.
So you have to, if you want to stay in elected office, you got to run for something, and controller makes sense. You're born in Brooklyn. You've been a Brooklyn councilman, Bay Ridge area, but now you want to cover the whole city.
Yes, sir. I was born in Bay Ridge. I currently represent the 47th district in southern Brooklyn. It goes from Bay Ridge all the way to Coney Island and Seagate.
Nice, very serious. Controller, though, the city is in bad shape because of the migrant mess. Billions of dollars have been spent for the migrants. I know even Mayor Adams just the other day was saying he needs more money. So if you get to be controller, the city is not in great fiscal shape.
So I would disagree with that, actually, Zev. I think the city's economy is actually proven to be durable and resilient against all odds, basically. The mayor certainly, pounded this narrative that the migrant crisis was going to bankrupt the city, and that was never the case. Even if he thought it was true, it's not true because it never happened. The city economy is stronger than ever. Tourism is back, jobs are back, our tax revenues are up. And we're in a good spot. One of the reasons why I'm running for controller is frankly, because with a $115 billion budget, I don't think people should be struggling so hard in the richest city in the world. But I think it comes down to priorities. And, the city council, we were one of the first actually to come out and say that we thought the mayor's forecasting for the migrant crisis was completely overblown. The numbers that he was forecasting as far as how much it was going to cost the city, we disagreed with those numbers, and we've been proven right. We've been vindicated in that the forecasting that we did in the city council, as well as other economists, that the migrant crisis did not bankrupt the city. It certainly was.
Hurt the city. How much did we spend on the migrants?
We've spent, according to City Hall, we spent north of $6.5 billion. But if you put it that way, as one of my colleagues recently said, that was $6.5 billion that apparently we weren't spending on New Yorkers before. And that's what concerns me so much, that if we were able to absorb the cost of the migrant crisis, then why weren't we spending that money on New Yorkers before the migrant crisis? So, I think right now, unfortunately, you have a mayor who has confused fiscal responsibility with austerity, right? Like, the reason why the city's bond ratings are so strong and so high and so stable is not because of cuts that are made to the budget. It's because the economy is strong. And something that the council has always pushed back on is a lot of these cuts were never necessary in the first place, and they give people a lot of anxiety, Zev. When you tell people, when you tell a working family that we're going to have to make cuts to early childhood education, that creates a lot of anxiety for working New Yorkers, and it's just not necessary.
No, but you have to admit, if we're spending $6.5 billion, that it has an impact, because it's on the city, on the finances. And the fact is, those city services have been cut. And even now, are we in great shape with congestion pricing? Less people are coming into Midtown Manhattan.
Well, I'll say this: what the concern for us over the past few years it's not as an exciting of a headline. So unfortunately, it doesn't always make the news. But the bigger challenge for us financially when we've been balancing the books has not been the migrant crisis. It has been the expiration of the COVID stimulus funds that we got from the federal government, right? So you had a lot of temporary money that was used to prop up a lot of programs that became permanent. So you have temporary money funding now permanent programs. So when that money now, when you're seeing the final expiration of the federal money, scrambling and trying to figure out, make ends meet and make the numbers make sense to fund these priorities that New Yorkers have come to rely on, that was honestly, Zev, that was the bigger challenge for us than managing the migrant crisis. We were able to, through reserves and cutting back in certain areas, we were able to manage the migrant crisis. But the COVID stimulus funds, that was actually the expiration of the COVID stimulus funds, that was actually a bigger challenge for us. It doesn't get the same headlines as the migrant crisis for obvious reasons. But when we were in those rooms and trying to figure out how to balance this budget, that was what we were most worried about.
No, I can understand that. The temporary money for permanent programs, that's on the issue that has to be dealt with. What about congestion pricing? Do you support it? And like I said, less people coming to the city. There are people that are saying that business is down in certain areas, so which is not good for New York if that's the case.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think the jury is still out. I think, first of all, I think the branding is terrible. I don't think it should have been called congestion pricing, right? Those are two things I don't like: congestion and paying for stuff, right? So congestion pricing, that needs a full public relations rebrand. It should have been called, Central Manhattan Access or Fast Pass to Manhattan or something. Because what I've heard from people, honestly, is not only anecdotally, but I've seen news reports. I saw an interview the other night on the news where they stick a microphone in some guy's driver's face while he's sitting in traffic, and the guy was, I think the guy was commuting from Long Island or Staten Island, and he said, "Look, I don't love paying the $10, but the $9, I pay it, and my drive is actually a lot easier. There's less traffic, there's less congestion, so I don't mind paying that if it's going to make my life easier." And I feel like that's how we need to see things. The challenge for me as an Attleboro guy has been there's just not a ton of trust in the MTA, right? There's been decades and decades of mistrust there. I think the current MTA is doing a much better job, but the idea that we're just sort of writing a blank check to the MTA for an IOU, basically, that they're going to fix our subway system down the road, there's a real crisis of confidence there. And for folks in neighborhoods where we have a lack of transit options, there's a trust deficit there. And I think
But here the problem is, Councilman, the problem is that there's so much waste. And for even just take fare beating, the amount of fare beating, if you were to cut down on that, you wouldn't need to have an extra tax on congestion pricing. If you became more efficient, maybe you should have an Elon Musk type individual monitoring. What do you think about that? He can't do it. Maybe one of a clone of his.
Well, I do think, I don't know about Elon Musk, but I do think that what we could use is some better technology when it comes to the ghost plates. The ghost plates is a real problem, right? Right now, the technology we have right now is it's basically a Polaroid from 1987, that if you run a red light or you don't pay your Easy Pass or whatever it is, the camera takes a photo of your license plate. If your license plate says "Let's go Mets" and you bought it at a gift shop, that's what the camera takes that photo. So the people that are obstructing their license plates, and you see, people put a sticker over it, or they make it like a leaf fell on their license plate. The technology exists right now to get away from all of that. We shouldn't be spending money on law enforcement, pulling over cars for ghost plates. The technology exists so that no matter what your license plate says, we know who's driving that car, and we can send a ticket or a bill to that car. And the technology is there. Why the city of New York is not leveraging that technology, I have no idea. But I think we're losing a lot of money there as well.
But I think the bulk of the money, at least from what I've read, and you would know better than I, is from people beating the fare, jumping over the turnstiles. That seems to be a massive millions upon millions of dollars that are being lost in revenues.
Again, it's one of those things where I think that gets a lot of the headlines, and people are not talking enough about the ghost plates, right? I mean, look, hopping a turnstile for a MetroCard fare is a lot less than people blowing through the $20 toll on the Verrazano Bridge, right? So, I think we have to get serious about all of this stuff. But I think the ghost plates is a place where we're really losing revenue, especially as it relates to congestion pricing. If you're doing congestion pricing and now you're going to charge people for coming into the city, well, don't make me a sucker because I'm the working guy who, I don't hide my plate and I have to pay the fare. The guy next to me has a sticker that blocks his license plate, and now who's better than him? It's not fair.
Brooklyn Councilman Justin Brannan is with us. He is originally from Brooklyn, a musician. He's running for Comptroller, New York City Comptroller here in New York. Are you going to, since you're a musician, are you going to be making jingles for your commercials for your campaign?
Zev, the kind of music I play, I'll come in there and play my music. If people aren't leaving an event and I come in and play, then they leave the event. So that's when they call me in. So
first of all, how's the campaign coming along?
Oh, it's going great. It's a big city, a lot of running around, meeting people. And you know what? Look, what I love best about running citywide is you really get to travel the entire city and really appreciate how, in a city of 8 million people, how this is really just a city of neighborhoods. And we have, when I go out to Southeast Queens or the Northern Bronx or Staten Island or the Lower East Side or the Village of Harlem, there's just so much in common, and some people are all dealing with the same kind of struggles. Look, people are struggling to get by. The city has become increasingly unaffordable, but I think sometimes, people think that we all exist in these silos, but when you really start talking to people, talking to working class people, we're all dealing with the same struggles. And it's inspiring to me because there's a unity there in that we're all sort of going through the same things. And I think there's power in trying to bring people together across those divides and those boundaries to say, look, this is our city and we want to make it a better place together.
But Jews are having a tough time. The anti-Semitism levels are directed against the Jewish communities at unprecedented numbers. So you have a lot of Jews feel the anti-Semitism you find in all kinds of places, including in the universities and on the streets, especially in Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn, such as Crown Heights or Borough Park, Williamsburg, etc. What can be done to challenge this anti-Semitism, which has been going out of hands? You have these pro-Hamas demonstrations, not as many now as it used to be, but you have a lot of different. There was just an event about killing Jews that was just canceled from one venue just the other day. You see a lot of this taking place on a regular basis. What can we do?
It's a great question, Zev. I mean, I met yesterday. I had a great meeting with folks at AJC where we had a long conversation about this exact topic and figuring out in 2025 when things are as divisive and as tribal as ever in every way, especially politically. And when things feel so divided and so divisive, how do we come together? And how do we make people appreciate the humanity? And how do we, as human beings, acknowledge the anger and pain and the fear that Jewish people feel in these moments? And There's no easy answer, but I think, number one, as elected officials, you have a responsibility, an obligation to call out anti-Semitism in whatever ugly form it rears its head. And you have to be, unequivocally, you have to just be strong and call it out. That's the very least you can do, is call it out. I also think that there's a time to call out anti-Semitism completely on its own. Then there's a time to talk about how anti-Semitism is ultimately the toxic seed from which all other hatred grows. And I truly believe that where anti-Semitism persists, so does Islamophobia and racism and homophobia and every other hate and bias and bigotry in our world.
Except when you have the Islamists, like in New York, those.
Yes. So you have to be clear that you have to separate. I came out on October 9th or 8th, and I said, look, if we can't call out Hamas for this barbaric attack, if we can't call out Hamas as a terrorist organization, then we've lost the plot here. We cannot be afraid to call out hate. But it's also important that we acknowledge that all Palestinian and Muslim people are not Hamas. And you have to acknowledge people's pain and anger and fear as Israelis and Palestinians and Jews and Muslims that are experiencing in the Middle East and right here in the city. I feel my responsibility as a local elected official, I don't do foreign policy, right? I get potholes filled, right? My job is to get potholes and stop signs put up.
But you can make sure that money goes to Israel, that you invest in Israel, and again, stopping BDS, that's an important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never supported BDS. I think it's a divisive idea. I don't support it. Look, I've always taken the stance that as a member of the city council, I might not have the power to make things better in Gaza, but I certainly have the power not to make things worse here in the city of New York. And it's important that elected officials have the courage to stand up strong to anti-Semitism, to hate, and also to do your best to try to bring people together and to call out extremism. When you have people marching in the streets, calling for the death of Jews or waving Hamas flags, you have to call that out. You cannot be afraid to call that out. I don't know why you would be afraid to call that out, but you have to keep fighting in that direction for humanity, for peace, and to understand and just trying to bring people together around the fact that we all have hopes and dreams and fears, and we all deserve to live in peace and security and to be treated with dignity and to pray in peace and to go to school in peace. I just passed a bill, Zev. I'll tell you this, and this is something that I did. I passed a bill I built on former council member David Greenfield passed a bill back in 2015, I believe, that allows yeshivas and Muslim schools, all non-public, smaller non-public private schools, to get reimbursement for school security. And the bill back in 2015, it only was for schools that were for 300 kids and up. I just passed the bill the end of last year that now makes smaller schools eligible. So yeshivas can now get reimbursement for their school security if they have 150 kids or more. So it covers about 50,000 more students across the city. These are the kinds of things that local elected officials can do. So it's more than just words. You got to be there and you got to say the right stuff, and you can't be afraid to call it out, but you also have to back it up in how you're allocating money, the legislation you're passing, and the way that you're seeing the world. And I think that's a very important time for this.
I understand you have family in Israel.
I do. I have family living in Tel Aviv. So my aunt is Jewish, and my cousin married a guy from Israel, Israeli guy, and they lived in Tel Aviv for a while. Now they moved back to New York. They live in Connecticut now, and I still have family there. I still have relatives there. So it's very personal for me. I also represent one of the largest Palestinian communities in the state. So this is very personal to me, and I've done my best to try to bring people together in these really, really, really tough, hard times.
Except, though, you're finding that there's discrimination against bookstores in Brooklyn won't have Israeli authors, Israeli musicians, even comedians have been penalized not from the
Yeah,
Jewish end, but from the Muslim, Palestinian, anti-Israel end. You
yeah.
see
I
a lot
just
of that.
stuff like. I mean, there was some vandalism, some hate crime a week or two ago at a restaurant in Park Slope. And what I said was, how does this advance anyone's narrative for anything? How does this advance your mission other than stowing fear and chaos and hatred? How does this, how does refusing to listen to one side or the other, how does that help end the cycle of violence? And the answer is it doesn't. And I think we need to get back to that where no person in good faith is still struggling with the atrocity that happened on October 7th. But going forward now, that divisiveness and that tribalism, that is just not, that's going to get us right back to where we were. We have to move forward together. And when I met with AJC yesterday, we talked about ways to try to bring together some of the younger folks, the younger generation who, they get their information from very different channels, literally and figuratively, than we might have, when we were growing up. And it's important to meet people where they're at and to try to bring people together around our own shared humanity. I think that's the only way we can fix this.
Our guest is Brooklyn Councilman, former musician turned councilman, Justin Brannan. He is running for city controller here in New York City. Let's talk Jewish. Let's talk about your connection to the Jewish community. Jews are an important part, and they're going to play a role, of course, in selecting who the next controller, as will do the next mayor of New York. Tell us about your outreach to the Jewish community and your connections.
Sure. I mean, I've always maintained,
aside from your Israeli relatives.
Sure. I've stateside. I've always maintained a great relationship with the Jewish community here, especially in Brooklyn. Very strong relationship, with folks in Flatbush and Borough Park and Crown Heights. Just as a politician whose job it is to serve all people and to make sure that people, number one, that people feel safe, right? Elected officials need to get back to basics in that public safety is the number one priority. If people don't feel safe, then every other great thing that we might want to do, none of it matters, because you need to feel safe. And in a time like this, in the wake of October 7th, making sure that the Jewish community feels safe and protected is super important. So whether it's going to my local synagogue here at the Bay Ridge Jewish Center in my district, speaking with the rabbi there, making sure they have the security detail they need, making sure they have the funding they need and they're accessing funding to security, little stuff like that, to giving speeches and standing up and saying, look, I'm a type of guy, Zev, if you ask me where I stand on something on Monday, you don't have to check with me on Thursday. I still stand where I stand. And the same speech that I'm going to give in a synagogue, I'm going to give in the mosque and in the church and anywhere else. I don't change what I say. And doing that, I never lie because I'm just speaking from my heart. And I think my relationship with the Jewish community has been built on that trust that the Jewish community understands that I'm a straight shooter and I'm going to tell it like it is. And I'm always going to try to help as chair of the finance committee to make sure that our Jewish nonprofits that do amazing work for some of our most vulnerable among us, make sure that they have the funding they need to thrive and to serve. And that in a time like this, in the days after October 7th, that they feel heard and that they feel safe and that they know that even the guy in Bay Ridge is looking out for them and making sure that they're taken care of.
I also understand that you had worked for B'nai Zion a while back.
I did. The B'nai Zion, Jack Gruntsman and Mel Parness, they took a chance on a tattooed Irish-Italian kid to help raise money for their humanitarian foundation. And that's when I met Rabbi Potasnik. And I either credit or blame Rabbi Potasnik for helping me get into politics. And he got me thinking about, serving. But working at B'nai Zion is sort of what impacted me and really carved something into my heart, that they were doing work for Palestinians, for Muslims, for Jews, for Christians, for everybody, right? They were just doing great work in Israel. And that's what I fell in love with, because they were trying to, and they still are, the foundation's still around, that they're trying to build back that humanity, that respect, and treating each other like human beings and not treating everyone like the other, and understanding that my health and my safety and my security is tied up and bound up in your safety and health and security. And I think that would make us a safer place.
Now, one of the issues that is very important, especially to those religious parents that send their kids to yeshivas, day schools, with proof for Christians or Muslims send their kids to private schools, about tuition tax relief. There's been really a double taxation in place like New York. People are paying money for taxes, and if they went to public school, they would get a public education, could be valued at $20,000, $25,000. They're not getting that, and they're paying tuition on top of that. What relief can we provide for parents of parochial schools and private schools that they should have this double taxation?
Well, I mean, Zev, this is, the voucher conversation has been a long one. I used to work for the Department of Education, so I know the issue well. It's a state issue, ultimately. The city doesn't have much power here. But I will say this, the bill that I passed to increase the security reimbursements, that is a situation where you have the city of New York acknowledging that the parents who send their kids to yeshivas and Muslim and private non-public schools are also taxpayers, and the money that is available to them, if they choose to use it for security reimbursement, is a testament to the fact that the city needs to protect all children in learning environments, whether it's public or private, it doesn't matter. And the smaller schools, the schools that are only teaching 150 kids, who are not charging $50,000 a year tuition, they need help, and the bill that we passed is going to get them that help.
Which is very important. But I'm talking about even more than that, and that's certainly very important, is how do we, in a place like New York, make it easier for parents who send their kids to private schools to not have this unfair burden? What can we do?
Look, it's a conversation that's got to happen in Albany. I mean, they're the ones that ultimately hold, which has always driven me crazy. The effect, I mean, we were just up in Albany last week for Tin Cup Day, where everyone in the city of New York goes up and begs Albany for money. But I wanted to remind them that 50% of their operating budget comes from tax dollars paid by New Yorkers. So when all these guys in upstate New York are grumbling about how much money gets sent to New York City, I often want to remind them how much money we send to them in Albany.
Here's the toughest question of the interview. I know you're a vegetarian, but you go to a lot of events and you have to eat a lot of ethnic foods. When you go to a Jewish event, what is your favorite Jewish food?
Wow, that's a great question.
I told you it's the toughest question of the interview.
I love a knish. I like going to Yonah Schimmel's knish on the Lower East Side. It's just such a New York. It's just such a great Jewish New York food. I go with knish. That's my instinctual answer. So okay. Yonah Schimmel's knish on Houston Street. It's the best. You can't go wrong.
So the reason why you're running for a controller is because you're term limited, and Brad Lender, who the current controller, is running for mayor. Does this mean if you get to be controller that you will be considering running for mayor of New York? People ask me that. I think if I wanted to run for mayor, I'd just be running for mayor now, because it seems everybody else is running for mayor now. Look, I'm running for controller. Like I said, I really would not be running for controller if I wasn't already chair of the finance committee. Nobody knows the city budget better than I do. Nobody in this race knows the city budget better than I do. The mayor's job, I don't know if I'd wish that job on my worst enemy. It seems like a really, really hard job. But look, it's the greatest city in the world, and I just want to serve. I love the city with all my heart. I want to keep the city affordable and safe and clean for the next generation. Brooklyn Councilman Justin Brannan, candidate for New York City Comptroller, thank you for joining us. Look forward to having you back on a future broadcast.
Thanks, Zev. I'll bring my guitar next time.
But you got to sing Yiddish songs.
I'll learn.
You'll Yiddish and Russian for the Russian constituents.
Thank you, Zev.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Anyway, thank you. Great job. I enjoyed
Thank you,
talking to you.
Zev.
It was
You
fun.
too, man. That was fun. Thank you.